What's up guys, I'm Brad Rodriguez from Fix This Build That, and today I'm going to upgrade my router table. I'm going to make custom storage for my bits and all the accessories, and I'm going to take advantage of the unused space in the cabinet. Stay tuned, I'll show you just how I did it. So here's my router table that we're working with. This is the Jet cast iron tabletop. I love the huge cast iron top, and the fence is awesome, and the dust collection is very good as well. But what I want to do is get better storage down below. If you have a similar prefab work surface and you want to make use of the space underneath, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. So honestly, I'm not exactly sure how this is going to work, so you guys can be along on the ride for me. A little bit of a new thing here. I'm just going to kind of build on the fly and see what happens. Let's go.
Now my plan was to use leftover plywood to make the whole thing. I took off the bracket holding some of the accessories to the side, and then I measured for those side panels. And this pile of plywood had been growing for a while now, so it was great to find pieces large enough for the sides that I could use. I cut 2 side panels to size, but the table legs are 1.5 inches square, so to mount the drawer slides, I would need to cut some spacers too. And since plywood is undersized, I had to actually use a 3/4 inch strip as well as a 1/4 inch strip to make up for the difference. I did a quick model of the layout to get the positions for the drawer slides that I wanted. Then I laid out the marks for the lower drawer and 2 upper trays on each side. Using a speed square, I positioned the 1/4 inch and 3/4 inch spacer strips on the marks and tacked them in place with brad nails. I came back and pre-drilled the spacers, and I secured them to the side panel with 1.5 inch screws. Now the drawer slides I'm using were also leftovers from other projects, and to position them correctly, I used a scrap block to mount them even with the top of the spacer and used a piece of 2x2 to mimic the router table leg. Now this way I could give it a consistent 1/16 of an inch setback on each of the slides as it overhangs the panel. I marked the layout for each slide, then I pre-drilled and secured the slides to the spacer with screws. And I used the same process for each of those 3 slides. Then I grabbed the other side panel and I repeated the whole thing in a mirror image. Now make sure you think about the mirror image effect here. In the past, I've made the exact same thing twice, and then you're basically just sitting there with 2 left sides. The router table has thin sheet metal rails on the top and the bottom of the sides. Now the top rails already had 2 holes in them, but the bottom rails didn't have any. So I marked and drilled out for 2 holes on each of the lower rails to match the top ones. And with the new holes ready, I put the sides in place to secure them. I used 3/4 inch spacers on the bottom to lift the panel above a little bolt head on the bottom that was holding the mobile base. Then I locked the side in place with 5/8 inch screws through the side panels. I moved over to the right side and I quickly hit my first snag of the project. I hadn't factored in for the power switch, which wraps around the front right leg and sticks out a bit, and also the power cord there.
Alright, ran into a small issue here. I didn't take into account as I took this power switch off how it was going to mount in here. So the drawer slide actually goes right where this needs to be. It will actually fit in between the rail and the drawer slide, this metal piece, but I need to take away some wood. So I'm going to take that out, adjust it with my multi-tool, and then put it back in and drill a hole. We should be okay.
Now, unknowingly, when I used the 1/4 inch and 3/4 inch spacers together, I left just enough gap between the leg for that power switch bracket. But I did need to remove a little wood for it to clear, which I ended up doing with my pull saw and a chisel. Next, I drilled 2 holes in the side panel for the bracket mounting bolts to pass through into the bracket. I also drilled an 1.5 inch hole to run the router power cable through the side to get to the switch. Then I reinstalled the drawer slide and put the side panel back into the table. I secured the bottom panel first, and then I mounted the power switch through the holes that I drilled. Then I secured the top of the panel, and I ran the power cord out of the hole and into the switch to finish up. And next I made the lower drawer. I decided on a 9 inch tall drawer, and I ripped the parts down to size. I'm using my favorite quick drawer assembly method, and if you want to see the full video on how I make drawers, I'll leave a link down below in the description. And hey, if you're new here and you like what you're seeing so far, be sure to subscribe. For the bottom panel on the drawer, I didn't have any 1/4 inch plywood large enough, but I did have this piece of pegboard. Now it was the perfect fit, and I'm not going to use this for anything else, so I cut it down to size on the table saw, and I attached it to the bottom with glue and staples. And now my drawer has some built-in ventilation too. And to install the lower drawer, I put a piece of plywood across the lower rails for support. And I installed the slide using 3 screws per side, pulling the drawer out for the first 2, and removing it completely to attach the third to the back. Now next I moved on to the router bit storage. And for simplicity I was going to go with an L-shaped tray, one for 1/2 inch bits and one for 1/4 inch bits. I cut the plywood tray bottoms as wide as I could to fit into the space, and then I laid out some of my router bits to check the sizing. I laid out reference lines 1.5 inches apart all the way down the trays for the holes, and then I headed over to the drill press. I started with a 1/4 inch Forstner bit, and I set the depth stop on my drill press to go almost all the way through the board. There's a temporary fence clamped to the table, and it's set 3/4 of an inch from the bit. This let me drill holes down one side, flip the board around, and then drill holes down the other side. And instead of switching up the fence, it was easier to transition to the 1/2 inch bit and drill the same series of holes on the 1/2 inch trays. I finished up by centering the bit on the trays and running a set of holes down the middle of each one, which at the last minute I decided to offset from the other holes. Now this made a lot more sense when I looked at it, and it would give me more clearance for all my bits no matter where I put them. I used 1/2 inch plywood for the sides of the tray to save every little last bit of space that I could down below. And they got tacked into place with brad nails and then secured with screws. To add some reinforcement and give the drawer front something to attach to, I added a small block at the front of each tray, and these were just attached the same way with screws. I laid out a line down the side of each tray and installed a drawer slide on each one, flush with the front of the tray. Then I took them over to the table and ran into my next problem.
All right, yet another setback. Didn't really think about this. When you have the one slide here, it is not very strong at all. It just needs some more support. So you normally would have another one here. So I think what I'm gonna do is do what I did on my table saw storage cabinet and actually do a panel across both of them, and that'll shore everything up. So not a big deal. I'm gonna have to use a little bit of wood. I didn't want to, but that's all right. Just a little piece to span between here.
So I removed the slides and I unscrewed the sides. And this is literally why I don't use glue where it's really not needed. I can't tell you how many times I've taken things apart because of a screw up. I guess that's a motto of mine. Don't glue up if you're going to screw up. I cut a piece of ply to span both trays and attached them to the new piece. This actually went surprisingly well, and it worked out really nice. It was very solid with that second point of contact. Now for the other side, I was planning on 2 drawers, but I quickly changed directions based on what I had just seen and went with more of a shadow board for the accessories. I laid everything out and I was just able to fit all the accessories onto this one panel. Now nothing fancy here, I just drilled holes for dowels and I glued them in place. And I'll use the slots and the holes in the safety gear and accessories to hang them. Now for the router plate removal dealy whacker thing, I made a little holder using small pieces of 1/4 inch ply and some CA glue. Then I finished up by making a little standoff with a hole in it to hold the height adjustment handle. I really enjoyed figuring out ways to hold the different size shapes of the parts. You can make a little custom holder for really anything that you want. And having a place for everything and everything in its place is not only satisfying, but it's going to save you time when you're looking for that dealy whacker thing. The last piece of the puzzle was how to cover the dust collection box but still keep it accessible. I went through a bunch of ideas and options and ended up settling on running a board from side to side to secure a panel with screws. I made some notched corners on the end of a plywood piece to fit around the legs and drilled pocket holes onto each end. Then I spaced this plywood rail off of the lower drawer and attached it to each side with screws, making sure that the front was flush with the front of the legs. Now from there I could start attaching the drawer fronts. I cut the lower drawer front and drilled out holes for the handle real quick. Then I screwed it to the drawer and attached it with screws from the inside. I went to attach the drawer handle and you have got to be kidding me. Yep, my jig was at the same setting as the last handles that I used for my daughter's desk, which are wider than the standard bar handles I use for my shop furniture. I think we can all agree on one thing here today, is that I am not great at working on the fly, and I'm the type of dude who needs a plan, or a whole lot of do-overs. But instead of cutting a new front, I just embraced it, and every time I see these annoying little extra holes, I'll remember to check my jig settings. The top drawer fronts were pretty straightforward. The only thing I did here was remove some material on the backside to account for the top rail and the bolts sticking out further than the legs. I used a straight bit in the router table to remove just enough material to make everything clear and register firmly against those front legs. For the center panel, I screwed a 1/4-inch piece of plywood over the top recess in the back to make a little slot. Now this slot registers in that top rail, and then the bottom gets secured into the notched plywood rail that I installed earlier. Now the fit turned out really nicely, and the look is clean, which you know I like. I struggled through this project and left some of these things in here just to show you a little bit of my thought process and some of the reality of life in my shop. In the end though, the storage makes the router table a lot more useful, and it gives me a place for all of my accessories and bits.
If you want to check out another video, I've got another one right there for you. I think you're going to like it. If you're not subscribed to the channel already, I'd love to have you as part of the team. And until next time, guys, get out there and build something awesome.